This is the second challenge in the juxtaposition and hierarchy unit, and today we're going to look at this idea of design hierarchy and what exactly that means. And so essentially, it's a system to organize and rank design elements to create a measured contrast. The principle is intended to create a structured balance within a design. This is a design element that you see all the time. I think one that is certainly very easy to look at is at newspapers, is that there's this hierarchy established for importance. So the thing that grabs your eye the most is a headline. As we move to the subhead, the secondary stories, what's referred to as the body copy and the bylines, as we go down, we see this level of hierarchy being produced. And essentially what it does is it creates structure to the entire document, but then it also lets the viewer know what is going to have more prominence. And so if we are breaking this down systematically, like the graphic designer does when he's creating a layout, we can refer to this scale that's created, if it's very intentional like this, as a hierarchy key. And so you see there at the bottom, it's a corresponding that hierarchy key to the scale of the text that's used in the newspaper. So not only do graphic designers do this, but sometimes artists intentionally implement this same idea as well. This artist is named Polly Applebaum. This is called Love Park 27 from 2002. She is a contemporary artist, and this is a woodcut. And so just so you can see what this looks like in practice is that Applebaum takes these pieces of wood, cuts them up with a scroll saw, inks them up all individually, and puts them on this big jig that she made for herself so that she can put these elements in the exact same position every single time. Her intention is to create more than one print. And so by measuring exactly where they are, you can see here on the press that this is a lengthy process for her, but most woodcuts are much smaller, but you can see that she has a lot of energy and color within this, and she's able to print it all at one time, which is not typical for most color woodcuts. So when we look at these measured elements that Polly Applebaum created in this piece, is that she's taking these flower elements and she's breaking them into 4 different sizes and scale. And so if you look at every piece in that entire print, they're all fit one of these 3 sizes. And not only are they 4 different sizes, and it creates this level of contrast, hence interest, tension within the piece, but they are also a very measured distribution of size and scale. And so what happens is it has this structure element to it that is going to be a way of organizing all of these elements visually, that is going to be able. So essentially what this does, it allows Applebaum to create a very exciting image that has a lot of contrast, but it also creates this level of organization and structure, so it just doesn't seem to be disconnected, and so that there is structure within this piece implied, and I think it really pulls through. And so if we look at the hierarchy in color, she's essentially done the same thing too, is that there's this linkage between whether a color is bold, whether it's saturated, whether it's dark in value. And so I'm ranking them like this. This is my own personal ranking system. This is how I'm analyzing the color Applebaum used in that print. And so I think 1 is the most dominant because it's black, it's dark, it's high in value, and it has very high contrast compared to the other pieces. Those 3 colors there that I have labeled number 2, they are all similar in saturation. They're also similar in hue. They're sort of analogous to each other on the color spectrum. What I'm saying is that they all have the same visual weight. And then if we go down and look at the green, that has slightly less visual weight. It's slightly less saturated. It's a little cooler, so it moves towards the background. And then by the time we move down to number 4, you can definitely see this idea that it's very low saturated, it's very low in value. That is the least dominant color used in the piece. Finally, one thing I wanted to look at was this idea of hierarchy in shape as well. Most dominant piece is the first one there, which is like the most detailed. It has the most petals to this sort of abstracted flower. It has, the curves to it, I think, draw a lot more attention. They have more visual weight. We move down to the second one. It has slightly less detail. It's a little bit more blobby. And by the time we get down to the third piece, we see that, that has the most abstracted. It's the fewest petals, the least detail. But The thing is that we're seeing this similarity though. These are all very similar shapes. So when we look at the piece all together, and we can break down every single element in this piece to one of those categories that I just described to you for scale, color, and sort of this level of detail. But because they're all very similar shapes, and because she's distributing these evenly throughout the piece, she's very much in command of where these things are within the image. So she is directing our attention. She's counterbalancing heavier pieces on one side with heavier pieces on the other. She's able to sort of create this spectrum of color and interest by varying all of these elements that she has in the piece. This is, I think, an extremely good example of a very specific hierarchy established she created within the piece. Another piece I want to look at real quick is this piece by Nicola Lopez. This is called Steel Structure, 2010, ink on paper. This piece, even though she's creating these very architectural forms, this image has visual unity to it. And the way she's creating that is by implementing this idea of hierarchy to it. This whole drawing is basically done with the use of line. The way she varies and contrasts that line is by using this established sense of hierarchy. If we look in the foreground, or these elements that appear to be in front of the other elements, we are seeing that the black line across the top that sort of frames the left top and right side, that line is darker in value. It is wider, so it has a sense of boldness to it, and it's a black color, and so that's being viewed as what's closest to us. If we look in sort of the middle ground there, we see that red structure going through the piece. That is a slightly, the line is not as wide. It is, a red color, so it's not as bold as the black. It's not super saturated as a red. It's a darker sort of maroon color red. And as we look right down towards the bottom center, we see way in the background, we see a very light, thin line. It's also a light gray color. So it has this atmospheric perspective implied within this piece simply because Lopez is taking this idea of hierarchy and applying it to different lines to create this sense of depth. All right, so we're gonna take this principle and apply it to a drawing of your own. And so that's essentially what this challenge is going to be, is to create design hierarchy. So you will create a hierarchy key first, and you're gonna have to use a minimum of 4 different types of line. And your goal is gonna be to have a very even change within those. And so you can change them by lots of different features. Don't think you just have to change them by width and by color. There's different ways in which you can vary line and create emphasis. It could be a dotted line, it could be created with a jagged edge or texture. It really depends on the material that you're using. Could very much change the visual weight, which is something that we've already talked about in this class. Scale is going to the number one, the thing at the top, is going to carry the most visual weight. So as you move down through it, each piece is going to carry equally less visual weight, and it's going to create this structure and balance to your image. Then what you're going to do is you're going to find an image to depict. So this can be a photo, it can be from observation, it can be from imagination, it can be completely abstracted. You can combine all of those things. So basically an image from anywhere. And we're not really looking so much at what you're depicting, it's more of how you're depicting it and using this idea of hierarchy to create an organized image. So you're gonna create a line drawing of that image by applying these ideas. Once you're done, you're gonna upload not only the finished drawing, but then also the hierarchy scale that you created, so I can see how you're applying that to the image. I am going to create this demonstration digitally. I'm using Art Studio, which is a program that we have on the iPad. At Hempfield, all of the students have these. You should, if you're in the art department, you should have access to this program. It really offers quite a lot. It allows you to think with a wide variety of color, there's different widths and things like that you can use on paintbrushes and markers and such. And really, I think the great thing that you can use is layers. You can think in layers and bring those into the equation too. So here's what I created first, is that I'm creating a hierarchy key. And so it's going to be, I'm just using 3 here. I really use 4 in my image, but you're going to see how that works. as we move on here. And it sort of took me a while to sort of mess around with all of these different items here as I'm changing the width and the value and saturation, which is, I think, what they really have to offer. And so this is the final key. This is actually a screenshot of this is what I'm going to be turning in as part of my project. So make sure you save this. I found just an image of a sailboat online, completely ripped off, not mine. That doesn't matter. So if you want to depict an image of anything you want, go nuts. It's up to you. But I'm going to save this from online onto my photos, and then I'm going to import this into my file here. And again, if you're using traditional media, if you're using pencil and paper and markers and things like that, totally fine. You can use any medium you want. We're just looking at something that creates line, and that's going to give you a variance in being able to create a hierarchy scale using line. As I go through here, I start with my lightest color first. Yes, it's a very wide, deep layer, but essentially it's also a very the width is wide, but it's so low in value and in saturation that it's the least carries the least visual weight for me. So I'm going from the lightest to the darkest. You don't have to. It's completely up to you. And I'm working on different layers here, so I can sort of think about one thing at a time. So if you're working in traditional media, you can't do this because I can turn the layers off after I'm done using them. So I'm just basically tracing over the image now with this green line and going over top of it, going around here, and you can see I sort of create a variance of that green layer by creating a much thinner of that same exact color. And so this allows me to get some of the detail work and the lines and things like that on the sailboat, and even some textures in the waves and things. And then finally I go into the darkest part. I'm going to go with this red, and if you're paying attention, I'm creating a complementary color scheme because red and green are complementary colors, so it should create contrast. And red typically carries more visual weight than green, unless you're really changing the saturation like that or something. But it's a sort of maroon color here, and I'm just putting a few of these pieces around, not a whole lot. And so when I'm completely done, you can see that I'm going to turn the image off and turn all those hidden layers back on. Picture. I'm also going to create a tone surface. So I'm creating a background color that everything else is going to be contrasted off of. As it's all together here, you can see that, yes, I'm tracing the image, but by applying this sense of hierarchy scale, the final image here has a sense of organization and structure to it. And really, that was the point of me making it. So this is what I'm going to take and turn in along with my hierarchy scale, and that's all you need to do for the second challenge of this unit.